Hello, welcome to Marriage Unmasked. Are you married to an 8-year-old? That sounds pretty controversial, especially difficult. What we're talking about today is not are you married to an actual 8-year-old, but we're talking about the emotional intelligence in a relationship and how your inner child, your inner self, is often operating at an 8-year-old level when you're trying to relate to each other in marriage. And so a lot of us, we were just never taught emotional regulation, how to manage our emotions in a mature way when we're triggered or when there's things going on in our relationship that are especially challenging. And it often stirs up that unhealed or that younger self inside of us so that we end up acting out of the emotions of our 8-year-old self.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're stuck back in that developmental stage because we maybe have different survival patterns, or we never really matured beyond that phase because maybe we were not taught, how to repair after conflict, how to communicate emotions in a healthy way, how to handle disappointment without shutting down or exploding. And this is not about belittling your spouse or thinking less of them just because they do perhaps have survival patterns that they're stuck in these younger years, or they show up that way, doesn't mean we need to think less of them, use this as some kind of ammunition against them. The whole point of this podcast is to have more compassion towards our spouse and actually have more compassion towards ourselves, because you'll probably find that you can relate to a lot of what we're talking about in this episode too. I mean, I think we come from this generation, or maybe this is like the first kind of generation where we are talking about a lot of these things and we're shifting things, right? Our parents, grandparents, and so forth beyond that, they treated children a lot differently than we do now, right? Children are meant to be seen, not heard. I know a lot of times, even in church, parents were taught that emotional, physical abuse was okay. And so this was actually taught to parents to show up in ways that were really damaging to children. And what wasn't taught was how to be present with your kids, how to validate, how to process emotions in a healthy way. That was never taught to parents and never taught then to their kids or modeled for their kids.
It's really funny because even in church, you think about it, like kids crying in church. You bring your kids and then they're acting up a little bit or they're being emotional in church, and it was frowned on and it was judged and it was causing a disturbance and they have to go out. So even that is like emotions not being tolerated, not being understood. And I understand you need to be able to pay attention and whatnot in the service and stuff like that, but there wasn't a lot of compassion for that. There wasn't a lot of like compassion for kids who are showing emotions in the worship service even.
Right. I think kids were seen more as something to control. You need to behave in a way that I tell you to behave. You need to behave in a good way. And so we're not seeing a child, and we're also not seeing ourselves in a whole way where we are having compassion and we're understanding the way the nervous system works and regulation and emotions and all of that. Instead, we're just trying to force behavior. And so, what we see in marriage now is we see defensiveness instead of getting curious. We see shutdown instead of staying engaged. When you're trying to have these conversations in marriage, which are so important, right? Communication is key. But when you're trying to have these important conversations, yes, emotions come up. And a lot of times this is what we see, right? We can't stay present. We can't stay engaged. We also see a lack of vulnerability. Sometimes you don't know how to open up anymore because you maybe feel unsafe. You see blaming instead of ownership. We see avoidance instead of repair. So things go on and on for so long, this disconnect we stay in because we don't even know how to repair. We see needing to control each other in marriage to try to feel safe because we don't know how to feel safe as people. And we don't know how to get that need met. We also struggle to empathize with our spouse because we don't really have that compassion for ourselves. And so this happens when you're triggered into unhealed wounds. It happens because of a lot of reasons.
Yeah, a lot of this is formed while we're growing up in our family. How were emotions handled when you were a child? How were you handled as a child? This impacts how you show up in your marriage in an incredible way because maybe your emotions were dismissed when you were a kid. I mean, I can talk a little bit about my environment growing up. Like for us, keeping the peace was like the number one thing. Not necessarily true peace either. It's like keeping the peace so that everybody is like on a
So no one has
yeah, so
emotions.
no one has negative emotions.
Yeah.
It's like the negative
Well, what
emotions.
is a negative emotion though, right?
Right, exactly. And so there were certain emotions that were viewed as negative and that were judged really and even subtly judged as being bad or being wrong. And so those emotions were dismissed. They were not validated. So like we'd get angry, maybe my brother and I would get in a fight growing up, and we would be judged and shamed for being angry at each other, and we would have to like isolate and go in our rooms or whatever. So it's like dismissed, like that emotion is not okay, you can't have that emotion, instead of okay, this emotion, anger, is just an emotion you're having. How do we actually, in a healthy way, process through that emotion and talk through the conflict we're having in a healthy way? And that was never taught. It was just, you're not allowed to have that emotion. And so you got to deal with it. And then you're taught to kind of suppress it, to judge it and judge yourself for having that emotion. And so you learn to do that as a habit, to judge those emotions as negative. It could also be if you're in a childhood where like conflict was really unsafe, like a lot of yelling, there's a lot of screaming, there's unhealthy expression of emotion that would trigger survival in you. In order to feel safe in that environment, you have to get smaller, or you have to
Shut down your
shut
voice.
down your voice, shut down your emotion, or hide what you're truly feeling because of the big explosion, the big conflict. Because again, you're not taught how to actually have this conflict, or you're not given an example of what healthy conflict is.
Right.
You're really seeing your parents maybe, or other siblings, acting out of that emotional immaturity, and you're seeing that as an example, and that also is affecting you too. That's your going reference point for how to behave.
This brings up the point of like, we don't want you to think your parents are bad. Wait, we don't want you to judge your parents either, because I honestly think that our parents were probably doing the best that they could, but they
Absolutely.
also were, a lot of times, at least I know my parents, like they were kind of 8-year-olds, to be quite honest. In my family, that conflict being unsafe was very real. Now I look back and I see like, wow, like they were really acting out like 8-year-olds. But me being a little kid, I needed that safety. I needed someone to teach healthy conflict and how to have healthy conversations, and that just wasn't modeled. And so that is what I learned, and that is what I brought then into my marriage. Was it's a battle, kind of like fight to survive, which just brought a lot of pain for both of us.
Yeah. Another thing, this happened a lot in my family, was this performing in order to receive love. You were a good boy, and so then you received love. You were a good girl, then you received love. And if you were perceived as not doing the right thing, acting out, maybe being emotional in a way that was perceived as negative, you were judged, you were shamed, you were like criticized for that, even subtly sometimes. And I know this affected our relationship a lot too, because big emotions in my family, especially these negative emotions, were often perceived as selfish. Like it was selfish to have these larger emotions, these negative emotions, to disturb the peace. That was viewed as selfish, and it was subtly judged as selfish. So when I got into my marriage with Cara, she had no problem expressing some of these bigger emotions. And there's nothing wrong with, like, she's just having emotions, she's expressing it. But I would often subtly start to judge that and start to judge her as selfish because of my unhealthy way of looking at emotions, and thinking that these, what was perceived as more negative emotions, were actually just selfishness. And so then I would start to judge her for having emotion. And that was affecting our dynamic a lot then.
We're saying the word judge a lot. And it's like the bigger conversation here is it comes back to your own identity, right? It comes back to, do you know how loved you are? Do you know how to experience love and safety? And if you don't, you're probably going to control, and you're going to judgment. And so that's what our parents were doing, is they were trying to control us. They were teaching us to judge emotion, to judge ourselves, instead of accepting us in our being a whole person with emotions and needs and all those things. And so that's what we then learned, to judge ourselves, and then we judge others now from that. And it's just it's really this bigger picture of understanding and inviting in so much more of God's love, instead of always being in this culture of judgment and trying to do good and be better and perform. I think that's the bigger conversation, but obviously we don't need to get into that too much today. But I think, that performance to receive love is so key too, because then the opposite is true, where if you're pushed away, you're told to go to your bedroom, you're told that a tantrum, that's naughty, expressing emotions, that's bad, and you need to stop right now, or you're going to get a spanking or whatever, right? And love is withdrawn. And we have these deep beliefs about our emotions and about who we are and about how to respond to them. It makes such a difference on who we are as a person now as an adult and how we show up to our relationships.
What it does is it really creates these survival patterns inside of our brain where now we have to survive, and we shove parts of ourselves down into like a shadow, into like the darkness, and we judge those parts of ourselves, and we think that the only parts that are presentable, the only parts that are lovable are the quote unquote good parts. And so we actually are disconnected from ourselves then. We're disconnected from our own identity. We're not living fully in our authenticity because we are kind of fracturing ourselves. We're judging ourselves for these things when God actually loves us fully as we are, incomplete and total. Like he loves us perfectly. Conditional love that we give ourselves, that we receive, and that always creates a level of unsafety.
Yeah.
When there's a condition attached to the love, and God does not love us conditionally.
Right.
He loves us unconditionally, and that is why in God's love, we can always find perfect peace and perfect, healthy connection again. And so we just didn't have that growing up, and so we've adapted with all of these survival methods, and then we still show up that way. Those unhealed parts of ourselves that are still kind of stuck in 8-year-old mode show up in our marriage in some really powerful ways that affect our dynamic.
Right. I mean, marriage exposes a lot of these wounds, right? They come to the surface. It's not because you're bad. It's not because you're not meant to be together. It's just that it exposes a lot of these things. We have the option then of growing, allowing each other to grow in a safe way, or we then slip back into these patterns, and that can cause unsafety and more damage there. And so we want to encourage growth, obviously, right? We want to encourage healing. And that doesn't mean that you're not accepted right now. That doesn't mean you're not loved right now. You are. You know, I think of that passage from Ephesians 4, 22 to 24, where it talks about putting off the old self and letting your minds and your hearts be made new.
When he talks about putting off your old self and putting on the new self is created in Christ. So the new self is actually full of that love from God, that unconditional love, and showing up in the healthiest possible way. And so we put that on because we are so loved by him, because we have a beautiful relationship with God, and because we have Jesus completely forgiving us of all of our sins. And so this new self is really the one that is formed in love. And the old self is really the one that is in defensive mode. It is the one that's hurting. It's the one that's feeling all this conditional love. And it's trying to always earn favor with God and with other people. It's trying to perform in order to receive the love that God has already given us. And that is disconnecting. And so the old self is really the natural part of ourselves that doesn't actually know God's love. It doesn't fully live in God's love.
It's a perspective shift. It's realizing, oh, this is actually who I am, right? Instead of like, oh, this is who I am and this is the way I'm going to just keep living. It's this like, whoa, oh, this is actually who I am, right? When we bring in the healing and we bring in the truth of what God says about us and how he loves us, when we really realize that, then we show up in a very different way.
And this really ties in with like spiritual maturity and emotional maturity. They are very, very closely tied together. And we see that in 1 Corinthians 13:11, which talks about how when I was a child, I talked like a child, I acted like a child, I spoke like a child. Now, when I became a man, I put away those childish ways of thinking. That whole context of that passage is in love and showing love. And so a lot of times we get this idea that spiritual maturity is about knowing the right things, knowing everything about the Bible, like I have all the answers right, and I can check the box, and I know that Jesus loves me, and all this. We think that's spiritual maturity, but spiritual maturity is actually wisdom, not just knowledge. It's actually taking that knowledge of what Jesus has done for us and all that and applying it in a real and practical way in our life. What that does is that fills us with that love on an emotional level as well, not just in our head, but also in our emotions, that we know that we are fully secure, perfectly loved, and then we also show up in that way with other people.
You know, it's kind of like that out of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? What's inside of us, whether it's the hurts in our heart or whether it's when we start to see ourselves really formed by God's love, that is what's coming out of us. And so the two are so interconnected there, the spiritual maturity, the emotional maturity.
Yeah, because the emotional maturity is how we start to express in a healthy way who we are because of what Jesus has done for us, and that spiritual maturity that we have because of everything that we have in God and his love. And so we express it with that emotional maturity, and that helps us to have relationships that are really connected, are fulfilling, life-giving, and healthy for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of what I teach in the Femininity Restored course to the Wise and Restored, because it's a natural thing. I think that's what's so different. A lot of times people come to me and they think they need to do stuff differently or fix themselves to be more feminine, but that's not it. Because when we heal some of these wounds and we see ourselves the way God really sees us, and we come back to that identity, we naturally feel different. We are now fully alive and we are living from a whole place. And men naturally then rise into their masculinity. We show up in a way that just feeds life into others and pours that love that God is giving unto us onto others. And it's just so powerful. And we really want you to celebrate the growth along the way, right? I think sometimes we get stuck on the well, okay, yes, I'm in this wounded place, so now I'm going to invite healing in, and I'm going to start to address some of the stuff. And then we expect it to be a quick, quickly, everything's better now. But we just don't go from wounded to perfection. No one goes to perfection, first of all, right? And so, celebrate those things. Celebrate when you pause before you react. Celebrate when you stay present and you know how to regulate your nervous system. Celebrate when you can express your emotions in a healthier way. Celebrate when you're able to really listen well instead of thinking about how you want to respond to them or, shutting down and closing yourself off. And celebrate when you can repair. When you repair after conflict faster, you have that compassion towards yourself, you have compassion towards your spouse. These are all beautiful things that we want to celebrate along the way.
Yeah, and another big thing to celebrate is taking ownership. When you are realizing the things that you needed to take ownership for, and you're actually doing that, you're actually showing up and saying, hey, I've been acting immaturely in this way. There's this humility to it. You can celebrate that. That is so powerful for your growth. It really is when you actually take that ownership.
Yeah, awareness is key. That's the first big key. And you're getting that awareness here now. Then it's ownership, right? Awareness without ownership, it doesn't really go anywhere. The ownership is the next step. And then it's starting to invite in this process of healing.
Yeah. And if you feel like you're married to somebody who is really operating out of this 8-year-old emotional energy, this kind of situation that we're talking about, then also be aware that you're going to need to give yourself some attention in this area as well. There are usually some deeper emotions that you're going to need to work through as well as you are showing up for your spouse, because this sort of situation, it can stir up some things like loneliness, like they're operating out of this emotional immaturity. So how do you connect to them? How do you open your heart to them? And so you might feel lonely. You might feel very exhausted because you're bearing the weight of the emotional energy in the relationship. You can have resentment. That can also come up in a lot of ways, because why should I be the one who has to deal with this? Why should I always have to be the mature one in the relationship? Why should I have to deal with the emotional energy so much? So a lot of these things can start to come up. And so you need to get healing for those things inside of your own heart. You need to take those to a safe place. You need to process those with God. Like our physical bodies, they need help, especially when we're exerting a lot of energy. We need proper rest, proper care, proper sleep. We need to eat healthy. We have an emotional body as well, and we need to take care of that. So it needs proper rest. It needs time with God. It needs space and safety to heal and to stay strong and to be able to repair. And so it's important to get that safety and get that strength and to get that energy back when you are feeling a bit depleted yourself.
I want to encourage you, if you're like, yes, I do feel it's because of his, or her emotional immaturity. I do feel lonely. I do feel exhausted. I want to encourage you to not jump to like a superiority kind of view of it. If only they would do this, because I have done the work. I hear that a lot. It's easy to go there, but what's not as easy is to recognize in yourself, right? Taking ownership again. You want to honor the emotions if you're feeling disappointed, if you're feeling afraid, all those things. Process them, but also don't use that as like, yep, they still need all this work, but I'm here and now I am like a victim to their lack of healing, their lack of growth. Take your power back in that, because what happens when we get into that kind of superiority, or we're not really taking ownership, it's very easy to project that onto them and apply pressure, come with criticism, come with shame, or a lack of empathy, a lack of curiosity. We want to bring kindness. We want to bring acceptance and love. And so it's important to attend to your heart, find that safety for yourself with God so that you can come to them full and whole. That's a gift that you're giving yourself, but then it's a gift you can also give them when you come full and you come accepting of them no matter where they're at, because they're never going to be perfect and they're going to have a really hard time growing if they feel measured and judged and shamed, like they're not good enough. I know for me, that was a big shift I had to make. Was I needed to show Adam, I needed to first accept him in my own heart. I was judging him a lot, and I needed to really decide, I accept him, right? I will accept him no matter where he's at in his growth journey, in his healing. I'm going to leave that up to him and God. I don't need to have my hand in that anymore. That was a big part of me relaxing into my femininity, is like, I don't need to have my hands in that too. I can relax, come back to who I am. I don't need to take on more weight. I'm going to let that go. And I'm going to focus on, getting my needs met and attending to my heart, because things come up that hurt. And so I need to really give my attention to that. Take ownership for my own growth, right? Take ownership for how I'm showing up. That really helped me so much to not only like take the pressure off of him and allow this openness to his own journey, but it allowed me to really come back to who I was as a woman, come out of that survival mode, that over functioning, that masculine energy, and come back and relax into who I am and pursue pleasure and joy. That is so important for women. I have an event coming up. It's now open for registration. It's called Come Back to You. It's going to be a 2-day event where I'm helping women just come back to that woman that's been buried under pain and exhaustion and over functioning and self-protection. And I want to help you to relax back into your femininity, find the pleasure, the joy, the fun, the playfulness again. It's going to be such a powerful 2 days. I cannot wait. We'll have the link in the show notes for you. I have so many great resources with this topic, but that's a big one. I want to make sure you don't miss it. But it is so important to make that shift, because often we're trying to force their growth. We're trying to push them, but we can actually inspire them. And it's so much more powerful when we come back to ourselves as women and growing ourselves and relaxing back into that femininity. Naturally, it just shifts the environment in the whole relationship.
Yeah, and safety is such an important part. It's like safety is an environment in which growth happens. We encourage each other's growth when we provide a safe environment for that growth to happen. And when we're judging, when we're shaming, when we're like critical, that creates unsafety, and then it can discourage or it can hamper that growth from happening. And that is why getting safety with God is one of the most important ways to grow in these things. But emotional intelligence is something that is learnable. Your brains change, your patterns can change. Like God has made us to adapt and grow and change, and marriages change. I think of Philippians 1:16, he who began a good work in you, he will carry it on to completion. And that really does take the pressure off, because it's really God who's helping you grow. Like, yes, you put in some effort and growth, but you don't have to force yourself. You don't have to think of it as like this to-do list thing. Well, it's all about your behavior, and it's all about, I gotta do this better. God is at work. And you let him in, you let him into that growth, and you let him do some of those works, and you get aware of how he's calling you into maturity here and calling you into a higher version of yourself. And so the goal is never to just have like 2 perfect people in the end. That's not the goal. The goal is really like 2 people who are going after growth. And that takes the pressure off. Recognize that growth and celebrate that growth together.
So we hope that this podcast has just helped bring some things to light so that you're aware of them. And again, I encourage you to focus on the things that are going on inside of you. It's very easy to think of like, yep, my spouse needs this, he needs that. But I encourage you to take ownership for you first. Of course, you can invite them into growth. You can invite them into learning, and that's fantastic. It's great to do things together. It's so important, I think, to come to this all with compassion. Compassion for yourself, compassion for your spouse, compassion even even for your parents and the
Yeah.
caregivers that shaped how you grew up and some of the patterns that you've brought now into adult life. Just so much compassion because we're all in this together. When we bring that commonality and we realize we all have different things, can we accept each other even in those things, right? Can we just bring in that gentleness and that love and kindness? That really creates an environment where beautiful healing happens. And I'll put another resource or two in the show notes for you because I have some great ones for, living this out in a really healthy way. But love to hear your feedback on this episode. We'd love it if you'd rate and review the podcast, and we will see you next week.